The evening at Harmony Restaurant had begun like any other Friday. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware. The soft clink of glasses and quiet conversation filled the air as servers in crisp black uniforms moved between tables with practiced grace. In the kitchen, things were different. Head chef Thomas wiped his brow with the back of his hand as he called out orders. The usual calm of the kitchen had given way to a tense atmosphere, and it wasn't because of the food. "Has anyone heard from Philip?" Thomas asked, glancing at the empty grand piano in the corner of the main dining room. The black Steinway stood silent, its bench unoccupied. Philip, their regular pianist for the past 5 years, was nowhere to be seen. Lisa, the hostess, shook her head as she grabbed menus for a party of 4. "Nothing. I've called him 3 times. In his office, Robert Winters stared at his phone, willing it to ring. As restaurant manager, he prided himself on Harmony's reputation for excellent food and live classical music. The piano performances were as much a part of the dining experience as the gourmet meals. He ran a hand through his graying hair and loosened his tie slightly. Philip had never missed a performance in 5 years, not even when he had the flu last winter. The door to his office swung open, and Lisa appeared, her face tight with worry. "Mr. Winters, the Hendersons are asking about the music. They booked their anniversary dinner specifically because Philip was going to play their wedding song." Robert stood up, straightening his tie again. "Tell them Philip is running a bit late, but will be here soon." The lie felt bitter on his tongue, but he needed time to figure something out. As he stepped into the dining room, Robert felt the weight of expectation. Half the tables were filled and more guests were arriving. The empty piano seemed to mock him from its place in the corner. He thought about playing recorded music but quickly dismissed the idea. Harmony wasn't that kind of place. Just as he was considering whether he should call the music school downtown to ask for an emergency replacement, a commotion from the back of the restaurant caught his attention. Near the kitchen entrance, a young woman stood talking to one of the busboys. She seemed out of place in the elegant setting, wearing faded jeans and a simple gray sweater that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she carried no purse or coat despite the chilly autumn evening outside. Robert frowned and made his way toward them, catching the tail end of their conversation. "Not hiring," the busboy was saying. "And even if we were, you'd need to apply online and come back for an interview." The young woman nodded, then asked something that made the kitchen staff who overheard her laugh. "I understand. But could I play the piano for a plate of food?" The sous chef, who was passing by with a tray of appetizers, snorted. "This isn't a street corner, honey. That's a $30,000 piano." More of the kitchen staff had gathered now, some openly giggling at the strange request. The young woman didn't seem offended. Her face remained calm, almost resigned, as though she was used to such reactions. Something about her quiet dignity made Robert step forward. "Excuse me," he said, causing the staff to straighten up immediately. "Is there a problem here?" The busboy looked embarrassed. "No problem, Mr. Winters. This person just came in through the back door asking if she could play the piano for food." Under normal circumstances, Robert would have politely but firmly asked the young woman to leave. Harmony had standards after all, but these weren't normal circumstances. He looked more closely at her. She was young, maybe early 20s, with a delicate face and dark eyes that held his gaze steadily. Despite her casual clothes, there was something in her posture that spoke of confidence, even grace. "You play piano?" he asked skeptically. She nodded. "Yes. Classical?" Another nod. "Among other styles." Robert glanced at the dining room where more tables were filling up, then back at the young woman. Her hands, he noticed, were clean with short, practical nails. The fingers were long and slender, and he could see calluses that came from hours of practice. He made a decision. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said simply. "I'm Robert Winters, the manager. Our regular pianist hasn't shown up and we're in a bit of a tight spot. I can offer you a meal in exchange for an hour of background music. Nothing fancy, just some gentle classics to set the mood." The kitchen staff exchanged surprised looks. The sous chef opened his mouth to object, but Robert silenced him with a look. Maya's expression didn't change much, but something in her eyes lightened. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." Robert led her to the piano, aware of the curious glances from both staff and diners. He felt a flutter of anxiety in his stomach. For all he knew, this girl could only play chopsticks or, worse yet, Pop songs that would clash with Harmony's refined atmosphere. "Just keep it tasteful," he murmured as she sat down at the bench. "If it doesn't work out, I'll signal you to stop." Maya nodded and adjusted the bench. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap, taking a deep breath. The nearest diners had noticed her now, some looking confused at the change in pianist. Robert stood nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. When her fingers touched the keys, Robert nearly gasped. The opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the restaurant, played with such delicacy and feeling that conversations paused mid-sentence. Maya's touch was gentle yet confident, her timing perfect, her expression peaceful as though she was alone in a practice room rather than performing in a crowded restaurant. As she continued playing, Robert watched in astonishment. This wasn't the playing of someone who had taken a few years of lessons as a child. This was the technique of someone who had dedicated thousands of hours to mastering the instrument. Lisa appeared at his side, her eyes wide. "Who is she?" she whispered. Robert shook his head. "I have no idea." By the time Maya transitioned seamlessly into a Chopin nocturne, the entire restaurant had taken notice. Servers paused in their duties to listen. Diners stopped eating, forks suspended in midair. Even Thomas and some of his kitchen staff had emerged to see the source of the music. The Hendersons, celebrating their anniversary, were smiling with tears in their eyes. Mrs. Henderson touched her husband's hand and whispered something that made him nod. Robert felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that the evening was saved, amazement at the talent that had walked in through his back door, and curiosity about who this young woman really was. As the nocturne ended, there was a moment of silence before applause broke out across the dining room. Maya looked startled, as though she had forgotten she had an audience. She gave a slight nod of acknowledgement before beginning a light Mozart piece. Robert turned to Lisa. "When she finishes this set, take her to the kitchen and make sure Thomas prepares her something special, whatever she wants." For the next hour, Maya played without a break, moving through classical pieces with the ease of someone reading in their native language. She played some well-known compositions that had guests smiling in recognition, and others so obscure that even Robert, who had worked with classical musicians for years, couldn't identify them. There was something about her playing that was different from Philip's polished performances. Philip was technically excellent and played with professional precision, but Maya played with something more, a vulnerability and emotional depth that made each piece feel like a personal story. By the end of the hour, Robert knew he had to convince her to come back. The guests were enchanted, the staff impressed, and the atmosphere in the restaurant had never been more perfect. When she finally stopped, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Maya looked uncomfortable with the attention, giving a quick, shy smile before standing up from the bench. Robert approached her. "That was extraordinary," he said sincerely. "Would you consider coming back tomorrow night? Same arrangement. You play, we feed you." For the first time that evening, genuine surprise showed on Maya's face. "Really? You'd want me to come back?" "Absolutely," Robert said. "In fact, I'd like to offer you Philip's spot until he returns. He's been having some health issues, and I'm not sure when he'll be back." This wasn't entirely true. Robert had no idea why Philip hadn't shown up, but he wasn't about to let this talent walk away. Maya seemed to consider this, looking around the restaurant as if weighing her options. "I can come back," she said finally, "but just for food like tonight. I don't want money." Robert frowned slightly. "That doesn't seem fair." "The quality of your playing, just food," Maya repeated firmly. "That's all I need." There was something in her tone that discouraged further argument. Robert nodded slowly. "All right, if that's what you prefer. Let's get you that meal now." As they walked toward the kitchen, he couldn't help but wonder about this mysterious young woman who played like a concert pianist, but asked for nothing more than a plate of food. Who was she? Where had she learned to play like that? And why was someone with her extraordinary talent walking in through the back door of a restaurant asking to play for a meal? Little did Robert know that these questions would soon lead to answers that would change not only his restaurant but the lives of everyone involved in ways he could never have imagined. The kitchen at Harmony fell unusually. Quiet as Maya took a seat at the small table in the corner. Usually this space was reserved for staff meals, but tonight it had been quickly cleared for their unexpected pianist. Thomas, the head chef, personally brought over a plate laden with the restaurant's signature dish, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and a lemon butter sauce. "I hope you enjoy it," Thomas said, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect. "It's the best thing on the menu." Maya's eyes widened slightly at the beautiful presentation. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is very generous." Robert Winters leaned against the doorframe watching as Maya took her first bite. The look of simple pleasure that crossed her face made him wonder when she had last eaten a proper meal. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Maya chewed thoughtfully before answering. "I've been playing since I was very young." "You must have had an exceptional teacher," Robert pressed gently. A shadow crossed Maya's face. "Yes," she said, offering nothing more as she returned her attention to the food. Robert recognized the signs of someone who didn't want to talk about their past. He'd seen it before in the restaurant business, people carrying stories they weren't ready to share. He nodded and straightened up. "Well, we'd be honored to have you back tomorrow night as we discussed. Would 6 p.m. work for you?" Maya nodded, seeming relieved at the change of subject. "Yes, that would be fine." After she finished eating, Maya thanked the kitchen staff and left through the same back door she had entered. Several of the servers who had laughed at her earlier now watched her go with newfound respect. "Do you think she's homeless?" Lisa whispered to Robert as they watched her disappear into the night. "I don't know," Robert replied honestly. "But whatever her story is, that girl has a gift." The next evening, Robert found himself checking his watch repeatedly as 6 p.m. approached. Part of him worried that Maya wouldn't return, that the mysterious pianist had been a one-night wonder. But at 5:55 p.m., the back door opened and Maya stepped in. She wore the same jeans but a different sweater, navy blue instead of gray. Her hair was neater today, pulled back in a tidy bun rather than the messy ponytail of yesterday. She gave Robert a small smile of recognition. "You came back," he said, unable to hide his relief. "I said I would," she replied simply. This time, Robert noticed that the kitchen staff greeted her with nods and smiles. Amazing how quickly things changed. Yesterday they had laughed at her request to play for food. Today they were eager to hear her play again. As Maya took her place at the piano, Robert saw that news of the new pianist had spread. The restaurant was nearly full, unusual for a Saturday early evening. He recognized several faces from last night, including the Hendersons, who had specifically requested the same table near the piano. At precisely 6 p.m., Maya began to play. She opened with Bach this time, her fingers dancing across the keys with effortless precision. Robert watched the diner's reactions, the slight smiles, the closed eyes. The conversations paused mid-sentence as the music washed over them. An elderly couple seated near the piano seemed particularly moved. The woman leaned toward her husband and whispered something. He nodded, his eyes fixed on Maya's hands. After an hour of continuous playing, Robert brought Maya a glass of water. "Would you like a short break?" he asked quietly. Maya shook her head. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, transitioning smoothly from Beethoven to something more contemporary that Robert didn't recognize. As the evening progressed, Robert noticed that Maya never played from sheet music. Everything came from memory, and her repertoire seemed endless. Classical pieces flowed into modern compositions and back again, sometimes with her own improvised transitions that were so natural, most listeners wouldn't notice the blend. By the end of the night, when the last diners were finishing their desserts, the restaurant had taken on a warm, intimate atmosphere unlike anything Robert had experienced in his 15 years at Harmony. He'd always thought Philip was an excellent pianist, but Maya brought something different, a genuine emotional connection to the music that somehow transferred to everyone who heard her play. When she finally finished, the applause was enthusiastic. Several guests approached the piano to compliment her personally. Maya accepted their praise with quiet grace, though Robert noticed she seemed uncomfortable with the attention. The elderly man who had been listening intently all evening made his way to the piano, leaning heavily on a cane. "Excuse me, young lady," he said, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had learned English later in life. "That piece you played just before the Rachmaninoff, was that one of Anton Karevsky's unpublished works?" Maya's fingers, which had been idly resting on the keys, suddenly froze. For a brief moment, her composed expression faltered. Yes, she said after a pause. It's not performed often. The old man smiled. I thought so. I heard him play it once many years ago in Vienna. You capture his phrasing beautifully. He held out his hand. I'm Dr. Joseph Chen. I taught music theory at the conservatory for 40 years. Maya hesitated before shaking his hand. Thank you, she said, not offering her full name in return. Dr. Chen seemed to want to say more, but something in Maya's demeanor must have stopped him. He nodded respectfully and made his way back to his table, where his wife was waiting. Robert, who had been watching the exchange from a distance, felt his curiosity grow. Who was Anton Karevsky, and how did Maya know his unpublished works? In the kitchen, Thomas had outdone himself preparing Maya's meal, a perfectly seared steak with truffle mashed potatoes and seasonal vegetables, followed by a delicate chocolate souffle that was usually reserved for VIP guests. This is too much, Maya protested when she saw the elaborate meal. Nonsense, Thomas said with a grin. You've earned it. We had to turn people away tonight because we were full. Word's getting around about you. As Maya ate, Robert sat across from her. Maya, he began carefully, I've been thinking. Philip, our regular pianist, called this morning. He's moved back home to take care of his mother and won't be returning. Would you consider taking his position permanently? We could offer you a proper salary, not just meals. Maya put down her fork. I'm not looking for a job, she said. Just food. But why? Robert asked, genuinely puzzled. With your talent, you could be playing in concert halls, not restaurants. A shadow passed over Maya's face. I have my reasons, she said quietly. Robert knew he shouldn't push, but his curiosity got the better of him. That piece the old gentleman mentioned, by Anton Karevsky. I've never heard of him. Maya's eyes flickered with something, pain, anger. It was gone so quickly Robert couldn't be sure. He was a pianist, she said, Russian-American. Not as well known as he should have been. And you know his unpublished works? Maya stood up suddenly. Thank you for the meal. I should go now. Robert regretted his prying. I'm sorry if I overstepped. We would still love to have you play tomorrow. Just on the same terms as before, if that's what you prefer. After a moment, Maya nodded. Same time? Yes, 6 p.m. would be perfect. After she left, Robert couldn't help himself. He went to his office and searched online for Anton Karevsky. The results showed a brilliant pianist who had taken the classical world by storm in the early 2000s, before mysteriously withdrawing from public performances 5 years ago. There were videos of his concerts, reviews praising his revolutionary interpretations of romantic compositions, and speculation about his sudden disappearance from the music scene. Looking at a photo of the handsome, intense man seated at a grand piano, Robert felt a strange sense of familiarity. There was something about the way Karevsky held himself at the piano, something about his hands. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lisa poked her head in. Sorry to bother you, Mr. Winters, but Dr. Chen asked to speak with you before he left. The elderly music professor was waiting in the now empty dining room. Mr. Winters, he said without preamble, that young woman who played tonight, do you know who she is? Robert shook his head. Only her first name, Maya. She's quite private. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. I've been teaching music for over 4 decades. I've seen countless talented students come and go. But what I heard tonight, he paused, searching for words. That level of playing comes along once in a generation, if that. And that Karevsky piece she played, it was never published. The only way she could know it is if she learned it directly from Anton himself or someone very close to him. What are you suggesting? Robert asked. Dr. Chen shrugged. I'm not suggesting anything. But I will be back tomorrow night with my wife. And I've already told several of my colleagues about your remarkable new pianist. As the professor left, Robert felt a mixture of excitement and concern. Maya clearly didn't want attention or questions about her past. But her extraordinary talent was bound to attract notice. What would happen when more people like Dr. Chen recognized the rare gift they were witnessing? And what was Maya hiding behind her quiet demeanor and her strange insistence on playing only for food? For the first time in years, Robert found himself truly intrigued by something beyond the day-to-day running of the restaurant. The mystery of Maya and her connection to Anton Karevsky had captured his imagination, and he suspected he wasn't the only one who would be seeking answers in the days to come. Within a week, everything changed at Harmony Restaurant. What had begun as a desperate solution to a missing pianist had transformed into the hottest reservation in town. The phone rang constantly with people requesting tables specifically on nights when the mysterious pianist would be playing. Robert had never seen anything like it. Maya now played 6 nights a week, still accepting only meals as payment despite his repeated attempts to offer her a proper salary. Each night she arrived 5 minutes before 6, played for 3 hours straight, ate the meal Thomas prepared especially for her, and then disappeared into the night. "You need to convince her to let us pay her," Lisa said one afternoon as she struggled to manage the growing waiting list. "It's not right that we're making all this money while she gets just a meal." Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've tried. She refuses every time." The staff had developed a protective attitude toward Maya. They respected her wishes to remain somewhat anonymous, referring to her only as our pianist when guests asked for her name. Thomas made it his personal mission to create a unique, special meal for her each night, carefully observing which dishes she seemed to enjoy most. On this particular evening, the restaurant was completely booked. Robert noticed several well-dressed people he recognized as members of the city's symphony board. Dr. Chen had returned multiple times, often bringing colleagues from the music community. Tonight he sat with an elegant woman in her 60s who kept glancing at the empty piano with barely concealed anticipation. At precisely 6 o'clock, Maya walked in through the main entrance for the first time rather than the back door. She wore a simple black dress instead of her usual jeans and sweater. Her hair was styled differently too, falling loose around her shoulders. The change in appearance was subtle but noticeable to Robert and the staff who had grown accustomed to her. As she made her way to the piano, a hushed silence fell over the restaurant. Maya sat down, adjusted the bench with practiced ease, and began to play. Tonight her music seemed different, more passionate, more personal. She opened with a Chopin ballade that built from a gentle beginning to a stormy, emotional climax. Robert watched the guests' reactions, noticing how they leaned forward in their seats, their food temporarily forgotten as they were drawn into the music. The woman sitting with Dr. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a napkin as Maya finished the piece. She whispered something to Dr. Chen, who nodded solemnly. For the next hour, Maya played without pause, moving through classical compositions with her usual flawless technique. Then she began a piece that Robert hadn't heard her play before, something darkly beautiful with a distinctly modern edge. Dr. Chen's companion suddenly gripped the table, her knuckles turning white. "It can't be," she whispered, loudly enough that nearby diners turned to look. Robert moved closer, curious about her reaction. "That's Anton's newest composition," the woman said to Dr. Chen. "The one he was working on before he withdrew. It was never performed publicly, never even completed." Dr. Chen patted her hand reassuringly, then noticed Robert nearby. "Mr. Winters," he said, gesturing for him to come closer. "I'd like you to meet Eleanor Wilson, Professor Emeritus of Piano at the National Conservatory and Anton Karevsky's former mentor." Robert shook her hand, noting the way her eyes never left Maya. "It's an honor to have you here. Professor Wilson, how long has she been playing here?" Eleanor asked, still watching Maya intently. "About a week," Robert replied. "She came in asking to play for a meal when our regular pianist didn't show up." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Play for a meal? But that's—" She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. Robert hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at him. "Do you recognize her?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. "There's something familiar," she said finally, "but I can't quite place it. The way she phrases certain passages, it's remarkably similar to Anton's technique. She must have studied with him at some point." As Maya continued to play, Robert noticed a young man enter the restaurant. Tall and slim with dark hair, he wasn't dressed for fine dining, wearing jeans and a casual button-down shirt. He spoke briefly to Lisa at the hostess stand, then took a position near the wall where he could clearly see the piano. The intensity of his gaze as he watched Maya made Robert uneasy. When Maya finished the piece, she immediately began another, giving no opportunity for applause. This seemed to be her pattern, to move seamlessly from one composition to another, avoiding the moments when attention would focus solely on her rather than the music. Robert made his way over to Lisa. "Who's that guy?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the young man. Lisa shrugged. He doesn't have a reservation. Said he just wanted to listen for a few minutes. He seemed harmless enough, so I told him he could stay if he kept out of the way. Throughout the next hour, the young man remained in the same spot, watching Maya with unwavering attention. Robert kept an eye on him, ready to intervene if necessary, but he made no move to approach the piano. As Maya began her final set of the evening, she played something that made several of the musically knowledgeable guests exchange glances. A rarely performed Rachmaninoff piece that showcased both technical brilliance and emotional depth. Her interpretation was unique, bringing out melodies in the middle voices that were often obscured. Eleanor leaned forward, her dinner completely forgotten. "Remarkable," she murmured. "Absolutely remarkable." When Maya finally finished for the night, the applause was thunderous. She acknowledged it with a slight nod before quickly standing to make her way to the kitchen. Before she could leave the piano, Eleanor rose from her seat and approached her. "Excuse me," she said gently. That was truly extraordinary playing. Maya looked uncomfortable but thanked her. Politely. The Rachmaninoff especially, I've never heard. Those inner voices highlighted quite that way, except... Eleanor paused, studying Maya's face. Except when Anton Korevsky played it at his final recital at Carnegie Hall 5 years ago. Maya's composure slipped momentarily. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely audible, and tried to move past. "You know him, don't you?" Eleanor pressed. "You must have studied with him. The similarity in your phrasing, your touch, it's undeniable." Maya's eyes darted around as if looking for an escape. "I'm sorry, I need to go." Robert stepped forward, sensing her discomfort. "Professor Wilson, our pianist, prefers to keep a low profile. Perhaps you could continue this conversation another time." Eleanor looked like she wanted to object, but then nodded graciously. "Of course. I apologize for being forward. It's just that Anton was my most brilliant student, and hearing echoes of his playing brought back so many memories." As Robert led Maya toward the kitchen, he noticed the young man who had been watching her making his way toward them. Maya saw him at the same moment and froze. "Alex," she whispered, the color draining from her face. The young man stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Hello, Alexandra," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." The restaurant seemed to fade away as Maya and the young man looked at each other. Robert felt like an intruder in a private moment, but stayed nearby, unsure of Maya's reaction to this person who clearly knew her by a different name. "How did you find me?" Maya or Alexandra asked. "Someone posted a video online, just a short clip from their phone. Dad saw it." The young man, Alex, hesitated. "He's here in the city. He wants to see you." Maya took a step back, shaking her head. "No, I can't. He's changed, Lex, the past 2 years without you. It broke something in him." Alex's voice was gentle but insistent. "He's not performing anymore. Barely even plays." Maya closed her eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing her face. "I can't go back to that life, Alex. You know why I left. Just talk to him. One conversation. That's all he's asking for." Before Maya could respond, Eleanor Wilson appeared beside them. She looked at Alex, then at Maya, and sudden understanding dawned on her face. "Alexander Korevsky," she said, recognition in her voice. "Anton's son." She turned to Maya, her eyes wide. "Which would make you Alexandra Korevsky," Alex confirmed. "My sister. Dad's daughter." The revelation hung in the air. Robert tried to process what he was hearing. Maya, Alexandra, was the daughter of Anton Korevsky, the renowned pianist. The mystery of her extraordinary talent and her knowledge of Korevsky's unpublished works suddenly made sense. Maya stood rigidly, looking trapped. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't want this." Robert stepped forward, putting himself between Maya and the others. "I think that's enough for tonight," he said firmly. "Our pianist has finished her performance and deserves her privacy." Eleanor looked like she wanted to object, but something in Robert's stance made her nod and step back. "Of course. My apologies." Alex was less easily deterred. "Lex, please. Just 5 minutes with him." Maya hesitated, conflict evident on her face. For the first time since she'd appeared at Harmony's back door, Robert saw her composed exterior crumble completely. "Tomorrow," she said finally. "Tell him I'll meet him tomorrow. But not here." At the park by the river, 2 o'clock. Alex nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you. He'll be there." As he turned to leave, Maya's shoulders sagged as if a great weight had settled on them. Robert gently guided her toward the kitchen, away from the curious glances of the remaining diners. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Maya, Alexandra, looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "No," she said honestly, "but I guess it was only a matter of time. You can't run forever." The morning after her identity had been revealed, Alexandra sat on the edge of her bed in the small studio apartment she'd been renting for the past 3 months. It was barely more than a room with a bathroom attached, furnished with second-hand basics: a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a worn but comfortable armchair by the window. There was no piano. She had deliberately chosen a place without one. She stared at the phone in her hand. An old model, nothing fancy. She'd gotten rid of her expensive smartphone when she left home. This one had just one contact saved in it: Alex. She'd never deleted his number, though she hadn't used it in 2 years. Her finger hovered over the call button. Maybe she could cancel the meeting, disappear again, find another city, another restaurant with a piano, another temporary life. But she was tired of running. A knock at her door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she peered through the peephole to see Robert Winters standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "How did you find me?" she asked after opening the door. Robert held up a small notebook. "You wrote your address on the employee contact form, just in case of emergency." He gave a small apologetic smile. "I hope you don't mind. I was worried about you." Alexandra stepped back to let him in, suddenly aware of how plain her living space was. "It's not much," she said, gesturing around. "It's fine," Robert replied, though his eyes took in the sparse furnishings with surprise. Given her talent and family connections, he had clearly expected something different. "I guess you have questions," Alexandra said, sitting in the armchair while Robert took one of the wooden chairs from the table. "Many," he admitted, "but they can wait. I mainly came to see if you're okay and if there's anything you need." Alexandra looked down at her hands. Pianist's hands, her father had always called them. Long fingers, strong but delicate, hands that could coax beauty from ivory keys. "I'm meeting my father today," she said quietly. Robert nodded. "I know, your brother mentioned it last night. I haven't seen him in 2 years. She looked up at Robert. "I just left. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a note saying not to look for me." "That must have been difficult," Robert said. "Both the leaving and whatever made you feel you needed to go." Alexandra was surprised by his understanding. Most people, when they learned who her father was, immediately judged her for abandoning such a privileged position. It was, she agreed, but staying would have been worse. She fell silent, lost in memories. Robert waited patiently, not pressing for details she might not want to share. Finally, she spoke again. "Did you know I was scheduled to perform at Carnegie Hall 3 days after I left? My first solo concert at a major venue. Tickets had been sold out for months." Robert shook his head. "I didn't know. Everyone was calling it my debut, but I'd been performing since I was 7. Recitals, competitions, special appearances at my father's concerts. The prodigy daughter of the great Anton Karevsky." Her voice took on a bitter edge. "I never had a choice." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "Don't get me wrong. I love music. I love the piano, but it was never mine. It was always his dream, his legacy, his reputation. The pressure just kept building until I couldn't breathe anymore." Robert listened quietly, understanding dawning on his face. "And that's why you play for food, not money. To keep it pure, separate from career and expectations." Alexandra turned, surprised by his insight. "Yes, exactly. When I play at Harmony, it's just about the music. No critics, no expectations, no family legacy to uphold. Just me and the piano and people enjoying dinner. And now your father wants to see you." She nodded, anxiety clear on her face. At 2:00, Robert checked his watch. "That's in 3 hours. Would you—" Alexandra hesitated, looking embarrassed. "Would you come with me? Not to the actual conversation, but just to be nearby. I know it's a lot to ask." "Of course," Robert said without hesitation. "I'd be happy to." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you." The park by the river was busy with weekend visitors. Families spread picnic blankets on the grass, joggers navigated the paths, and elderly couples sat on benches enjoying the sunshine. Alexandra and Robert walked slowly along the river path. She had changed into a simple blue dress, the nicest thing she owned now, and had pulled her hair back neatly. Despite the casual setting, this felt like an important occasion. "Are you nervous?" Robert asked as they approached the central plaza where she had arranged to meet her father. "Terrified," she admitted. "I've imagined this moment so many times, but now that it's here..." Robert spotted a bench with a good view of the plaza. "I'll wait here. Take all the time you need." Alexandra nodded gratefully and continued walking. She saw him immediately. A tall figure standing by the fountain, his silver-streaked dark hair ruffled by the breeze. Even from a distance, Anton Karevsky had a commanding presence. As she got closer, though, she noticed changes. He seemed thinner than she remembered, his posture less confident. He was looking down at the water, lost in thought, unaware of her approach. "Dad," she said softly when she was a few steps away. Anton looked up, his eyes widening. For a moment he seemed frozen, as if afraid she would disappear if he moved too suddenly. "Alexandra," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "You came." "I said I would." They stood awkwardly, neither knowing quite how to bridge the 2-year gap between them. Then unexpectedly Anton opened his arms. Alexandra hesitated only a moment before stepping into her father's embrace. He held her tightly and she felt him trembling slightly. "I've missed you so much," he whispered. When they pulled apart, Alexandra was surprised to see tears in her father's eyes. The great Anton Karevsky, known for his intense focus and emotional control, was crying openly in a public park. They sat on the edge of the fountain, the sound of the water providing a backdrop to their conversation. "Alex says you're not performing anymore," Alexandra said. Anton nodded. "I gave my last concert about a year after you left. But why? Music is your life." He looked at her sadly. "You're my life, Alexandra. You and Alex, when you disappeared, it made me question everything. Why I pushed so hard, demanded so much. What it all meant if it cost me my daughter." Alexandra felt a tightness in her chest. "I didn't leave because of you." "Not exactly. I left because I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything was about being a Karevsky, upholding the family name, fulfilling my potential. I just needed to find out who I was without all that." "And did you? Find out who you are?" She thought about her time at Harmony, playing simply for the joy of it, for a meal and the pleasure of seeing people enjoy her music. "I'm getting there," she said. "Your brother said you're playing at a restaurant now." Alexandra tensed, waiting for disapproval, but Anton surprised her. "He showed me the video someone posted. Just a minute or so of you playing that Chopin piece I always loved." He smiled slightly. "You found your own voice with it. Better than my interpretation, if I'm honest." "You're not disappointed?" Anton shook his head. "How could I be? You're playing with more heart than I've heard from you in years." He paused. "I know now that I put too much pressure on you. Tried to shape your career the way mine had been shaped. I forgot that music should bring joy first before anything else." Alexandra felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was not the conversation she had expected. The father sitting beside her seemed humbled, changed from the demanding perfectionist she had known. "I auditioned for the symphony orchestra last month," Anton said unexpectedly, "not as a soloist. Just a regular member of the piano section." Alexandra's mouth fell open. "You? But you've always said orchestra work was beneath your abilities." "I said a lot of foolish things." He shrugged. "I start next season. It'll be good to be part of something bigger than myself for a change." They talked for over an hour, the initial awkwardness gradually giving way to more natural conversation. Anton told her about Alex's new teaching position at the conservatory. She told him about Harmony and how she had stumbled upon it by chance. "Will you come hear me play sometime?" she asked finally, surprising herself with the invitation. Anton's face lit up. "I would love that. If you're sure you want me there." "I think I am," she said honestly. "But as a father, not a critic or a teacher. Just someone enjoying dinner and music." "I can do that," he promised. As they stood to say goodbye, Anton hesitated. "There's something else. The foundation is organizing a charity concert next month. Nothing fancy. Various musicians donating their time. I'm playing a short piece." He took a deep breath. "Would you consider performing too?" "Not as a Karevsky or a prodigy or anything like that. Just as one musician among many, supporting a good cause." Alexandra felt the familiar flutter of anxiety at the thought of a formal performance, but it was less intense than before. "I'll think about it," she said, not committing but not refusing either. They hugged again before parting, this embrace less desperate and more hopeful than the first. As she walked back to where Robert waited, Alexandra felt as if a weight had been lifted. Not everything was resolved. Years of complicated feelings couldn't be sorted out in one conversation, but it was a beginning. "How did it go?" Robert asked as she approached. Alexandra sat beside him on the bench, watching her father's retreating figure. "Better than I expected," she said. "Much better. So what happens now?" Robert asked. She turned to look at him, a small smile forming. "I'm not sure. But for the first time in a long time, I'm actually looking forward to finding out." 1 month after her meeting with her father, Alexandra stood backstage at the Community Arts Center, waiting for her turn to perform in the charity concert. Her hands were cold. They always got cold when she was nervous, and she rubbed them together, trying to warm them up. The sounds of applause filtered through from the auditorium as another musician finished their piece. Soon it would be her turn. "You okay?" Alex asked, appearing at her side. Alexandra nodded, though her stomach was in knots. "I think so. It's just been a while. 2 years, Alex said, then smiled. "But you've been playing every night at that restaurant. This is no different." But it was different. At Harmony, people came for dinner, with the music as a beautiful backdrop. Here, all eyes would be on her, all expectations focused solely on her performance. "Dad's piece was amazing," Alexandra said, changing the subject. Their father had performed earlier in the program, a simple but moving Chopin nocturne that had brought the audience to their feet. "Yeah, he's different now," Alex agreed. "More, I don't know, human." Alexandra understood what he meant. The driven perfectionist who had pushed them relentlessly throughout their childhood had given way to someone more reflective, more willing to show vulnerability. A stagehand approached. "Ms. Karevsky, you're up next." Alexandra took a deep breath. When she had finally agreed to perform, she had insisted that her name in the program be listed simply as Alexandra, not Karevsky. She wasn't ready to fully reclaim that identity yet. "You'll be great," Alex said, giving her shoulder a squeeze. "Just like at the restaurant. Play for yourself, not for them." She nodded and headed toward the stage. As she stepped into the bright lights, she saw the grand piano waiting for her. The auditorium was full, but in the dim light, the audience was just a sea of indistinct faces, except for the 3 people in the front row. Her father watching with pride rather than critical assessment. Alex giving her an encouraging thumbs up. And Robert, who had closed Harmony for the night so that he and the entire staff could attend. Robert had become an unexpected constant in her life over the past month. Not quite a boyfriend. Neither of them had put a label on it, but someone who understood her in a way few others had bothered to try. Alexandra took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She had chosen to play one of her own compositions, something she had been working on during quiet afternoons in her apartment, on a small keyboard she had finally allowed herself to purchase. As her fingers touched the keys, the familiar magic happened. The world narrowed down to just her and the music. The nervousness faded, replaced by the joy of creation, of expression, of sharing something true. The piece began softly, hesitantly, like someone testing the waters, afraid to dive in. Gradually, it built in confidence and complexity, weaving in subtle references to classical pieces that had shaped her life, but transformed into something new, something uniquely hers. As she played the final notes, a resolution that was hopeful without being simplistic, there was a moment of complete silence before the audience erupted in applause. Alexandra stood and took a small bow, her eyes finding her father, who was wiping away tears, backstage again. She was surprised to find Professor Eleanor Wilson waiting for her. "That was extraordinary, Alexandra," she said warmly. "Truly your own voice. Thank you." "Professor," Eleanor hesitated, then said, "I know this might be the last thing you want to hear right now, but the conservatory is looking for a part-time instructor for our community program, teaching children who love music but don't necessarily want careers as performers." She smiled. "After hearing you play and knowing your story, I thought you might be perfect for it." Alexandra was surprised. Teaching had never been part of her plan, but then again, neither had playing piano at a restaurant for meals. I'll think about it, she promised. Later, at the small reception following the concert, she found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many of whom were regular patrons at Harmony, who had come specifically to support her. Thomas, the head chef, handed her a glass of champagne. "The kitchen feels too quiet without your music," he said with a smile. "I'll be back tomorrow," she assured him. Robert appeared at her side. "So how does it feel, being back on a proper stage?" Alexandra considered the question. "Different than I remembered. Less pressure, more joy," she smiled at him. "But I still prefer Harmony." "Good, because we'd be lost without you now." Robert's eyes were warm as he looked at her. "Though I suppose we should finally put you on the payroll." "About that," Alexandra said, "I've been thinking. I still want to play at Harmony, but maybe not 6 nights a week, and I think I'm finally ready to accept actual payment." Robert raised his eyebrows. "What changed?" "I did," she said simply. "Playing for food was about stripping everything away, finding the core of why I love music. And I needed that." She looked around at the people chatting and laughing. "But I think I've found my balance now." Across the room, she spotted her father deep in conversation with Dr. Chen. He caught her eye and smiled warmly. "Your father seems different from how you described him," Robert observed. Alexandra nodded. "He is, we both are." She took a sip of champagne. "He's invited me over for dinner next week, to play on my mother's old piano. Will you go?" "Yes," she said, "but on my terms this time." As the evening wound down, Alexandra found herself standing outside the Arts Center with Robert, the cool night air refreshing after the crowded reception. "What now?" Robert asked. Alexandra looked up at the stars. "Well, tomorrow I go back to Harmony and play for actual money instead of food." She smiled. "And I'm going to look into that teaching position Eleanor mentioned. And I might work on recording some of my own compositions." "Sounds like a plan," Robert said. "But I meant right now, tonight." Alexandra laughed. "Right now I'm hungry. All that playing worked up an appetite." "I know just the place," Robert said, offering her his arm. "The chef is a friend of mine. I bet we could convince him to make us something special, even at this late hour." "That sounds perfect," she said, taking his arm. As they walked through the quiet streets, Alexandra felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The weight of expectations, her father's, the classical music world's, even her own, had lifted. For the first time since she was a child, her relationship with music felt pure again, a source of joy rather than pressure. 6 months later, Alexandra sat at the piano in Harmony restaurant, playing a gentle Debussy piece as diners enjoyed their meals. She now performed 3 nights a week, dividing her remaining time between teaching at the conservatory's community program and working on her first album of original compositions. The restaurant had changed too. Robert had renovated the space, expanding the performance area and adding a small stage. On nights when Alexandra wasn't playing, other musicians took her place. Talented students from the conservatory, giving them exposure and experience in a supportive environment. A familiar figure entered the restaurant, and Alexandra smiled as she saw her father being shown to his usual table near the piano. Anton came every Friday night, sometimes with Alex, sometimes alone. Tonight he was accompanied by Professor Wilson. The two had become good friends in recent months, bonding over their shared love of music and teaching. As Alexandra finished the piece, she segued smoothly into one of her father's compositions, not one of his famous concert pieces, but a simple, beautiful melody he had written for her mother years ago. It was their ritual now. She always included one of his pieces during his visits, a musical conversation between father and daughter. Anton closed his eyes, listening intently, a small smile playing on his lips. From his position near the bar, Robert watched Alexandra play, her face serene and focused. Their relationship had deepened over the months, built on mutual respect and understanding. They took things slowly, both aware that they were still discovering who they were and what they wanted from life. When Alexandra finished her set, she joined her father and Eleanor at their table. Robert came over with a bottle of wine, pouring glasses for everyone. "A toast," Anton said, raising his glass. "To music freely given and joyfully received. To finding your own voice," Eleanor added. Robert smiled at Alexandra. "To the girl who asked to play for a plate of food." Alexandra looked around at these people who had become her chosen family, her heart full. 2 years ago, she had run away from everything she knew, desperate to escape the weight of being Anton Karevsky's prodigy daughter. That lonely journey had led her to Harmony's back door, to a request that had changed everything. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass to join the toast. And as the conversation flowed around her, Alexandra knew that while her path had been unusual, it had brought her exactly where she needed to be. Not back where she started, but somewhere better. A place of her own choosing, a life built on her own terms, and music that finally truly belonged to her alone.